Welcome to the Indie Author Method podcast, where we share insights from authors on your writing journey. On the weekends, when you have a little bit more space in your day, we sit down with another author to discuss their processes and what they can share with you. Today, I'm so excited to talk with Benson, the author of the Call of the Sirens trilogy and a new release, Well of Eida, that released earlier this year, with book 2 in the series coming out later next year. KB, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me here today.
No, and thank you for the time. I really appreciate you coming on with me to talk about Well of Eida that came out. You got a second book in this series coming out next year. Let's talk about Well of Eida. What inspired you to write the book coming off of that Call of Sirens trilogy?
So I really was hoping to write something simple. My Call of the Sirens trilogy is 3 books, and it's based a lot in Greek mythology. And I felt like by the time I got to that 3rd book, the story had just exploded. I had so many different story threads and storylines. And as I wrote it, I felt like it was super complicated. And I kept getting lost in like trying to find the threads together. And I got it to work, but it was really hard. And so I felt like I needed a more simple book, a more simple story. And so I was toying with the idea for Well of Eida. This is the cover of it. Yes. And I wanted it to just be a standalone fairy tale retelling. And I thought it would be fun to do like a collection of standalones. I'd never done a standalone before. It's a running joke with my husband and me that it's impossible for me to write a standalone. And so I was like, I accept the challenge. I'm going to do it. And so I started toying with this idea for Troll Under the Bridge. And the more I started exploring it, the more I realized that the story I wanted to tell was not going to happen in 1 book, and it needed to have 2 books. And so I thought, well, that's fine. Like I can do a collection of duology fairy tale retellings. And so I started planning out, the basic idea for each of the, Troll Under the Bridge, Cinderella, Rumpelstiltskin, whatever. Mm-hmm. And the more I started planning those out, I realized that they were not all standalone stories. They needed to be one story, and it all morphed into this one thing. I ditched the idea of the fairy tale retellings, and now the only thing that is left is a troll and a bridge in this first book, and everything else is its own thing. Yep. And it's now going to be a 5 to 6 book series. So my husband was right. I clearly cannot write a standalone, but this series needed to be told as a series. So it was in an effort to try and give myself a break, and the story is actually way more complicated, but it's perfect that way, and I love it. It's a really good challenge. So
you're talking about with the Call of Sirens, that trilogy was based on Greek mythology. Here you were going to tackle folklore. We as authors, we tend to have little nuggets of bits of everything we've read over the years stored in us. So who were some of your biggest literary influences, and how have those influences impacted you as a writer?
So I think I have to give like a shout out to Stephanie Myers, because she's the reason I started writing and I wrote my Call of the Sirens trilogy, because like every other teenager who read Twilight, I fell in love with it.
Guilty. Yeah.
You too? And so I was like, I need to have another book that I love just as much, and I couldn't find it. Like nothing measured up. So I was like, well, I'm going to write my own. And I didn't. My first couple were terrible. But my Call of the Sirens trilogy really has some good Twilight vibes to it. And so I wanted a book that pulled me in like hers did that way. For Well of Eida, I really have drawn, this is not literary, but I've really drawn a lot from the Marvel movies for it, because I am so hooked on their characters and how they've developed them all, how they all relate to each other. And I think I'm probably really annoying to watch the movies with, because I just like analyze the characters the whole time. But my goal with my Well of Eida series was to try and get these characters that were super relatable. They all had these backstories, and they all would come into each other's stories just like they do in the Marvel movies. And 1 book in, I think I have accomplished it with this one based off of what like readers have said. But Marvel's like a huge inspiration and influence to me for Well of Eida.
Now, we talk about that, taking influences outside of literary influences in the Indie Author Method in our newsletter. So on Fridays, we generally try to dissect something out of film or television or even memes, that kind of thing. So I think it is important for other authors to understand that you can glean information from, you can steal information from, right? From sources outside of literary. Doesn't mean don't read, right? You still have to read. You still have to understand storytelling and writing. You can't be a writer without being a reader first. But
Right.
yeah, understand that you can pull information from those other sources. Absolutely.
And sometimes you can see, like, what I love with the Marvel stuff is I can look at Thor and see where he started and where he ended in a week. I can get that. But if you read the books, if there were books for Marvel movies,
Right.
that would take me like a year to read all those or longer.
Right.
So it's nice to be able to like quickly see, oh, how did his arc do this, and not have to focus on everything else in the story. And you can get quick snapshots like that from movies and these other places, like you're saying.
Yep. I think you've kind of touched on this, talking about how this story in the Call of Eida, or the Well of Eida, exploded. What kind of challenges did you face writing this book coming off of that earlier trilogy?
So the Call of the Siren series was really like, it just came to me. I knew what the story was going to be. It felt a lot more linear, which is funny because, well, Eida was supposed to be more linear and simple, but that one ended up being. This one was hard because I spent a lot more time in like the thought work brainstorming stage than I did with The Harvest and all of the Call of the Sirens books. And so I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out how is this actually, the story going to actually come together. And I think for Well of Eida, the editing was really hard too. I had an awesome editor who was very picky, and she told me right up front that she was going to dissect it, pull out all the nitty gritty things, which I wanted. Like, I love having other people tell me what they see, because often I can't see it myself. And so she went through and she did that, and she gave me a lot of good feedback, but it was really hard because it was a lot of feedback in like 2 different rounds.
Yeah.
That I remember at one point being like, what the heck am I doing? Like, I'm not a writer. Like, clearly look at all these things in here. And I went through and I fixed everything that I could, sent it back to her, and it was a whole nother thing going through it again. And I just remember feeling so overwhelmed and like defeated about it. And I had to get to the point where I realized that a book is never finished. There's always going to be one more line to edit, one more wrinkle you could iron out, one more typo that makes it through. But at some point the author has to be finished. And so that's what I did with Well Eida. I got to the point that I was like, I'm done with this book. It's as perfect as I can get it. I'm sure there's imperfections in it, but for me, this is perfect for where I want it to be. And I'm ready to tell the next story. And so that's where I stopped it. And I think that mindset really helped. That was like, somebody's going to find something wrong with every story out there. You know, it's never going to be completely perfect, and you have to be okay with that, or you'll never get anywhere with that book or with the series.
Right. Yeah. George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, said that. He said, art is never finished. It's just abandoned.
I love that.
And we saw George kind of tinker with his work afterward, and we saw what happened there with the Star Wars special editions and some of the changes he made. But I think to be able to understand where you should stop as an author, is important.
For sure.
So getting into that though, like talking about writing this book, talking about the editing process, what is your drafting and writing process like? How do you, when KB Benson sits down to write, what does that look like?
So like for doing a whole book, like that process?
Yeah. Starting from the very beginning.
So for me, it's a long process. I actually like really admire people who can bust out a book like every couple months, because that's not how I roll. I have to do, like I said, for Well of Eida, I had a lot of thought work into it. And so I'll spend like a month or two. If I'm smart about it, it'll be while I'm editing another book. I spend the time like brainstorming the next one. Okay. But then I usually will take like 6 to 7 months to draft a book, because I'm a slow drafter and I wait for the scenes to come to me, and I write every day for the most part, but sometimes it's only 500 words. Sometimes I can bust out 2,000, but it's never, 10,000 word days for me.
And so I don't know anybody does that.
Some people do. It blows my mind. I cannot do that. But so I'll do my draft, and I usually will leave a bunch of placeholders in it too, just to kind of keep the momentum going. So then once I finish that, I'll give myself a month off, and then I go back and I read the whole thing myself. And luckily for like Well of Eida, I feel like all the plot points were in place. My book coming out in January, they were not in place. And when I went and I reread through the whole thing, I could tell there were problems with it. And it took me like a year and a half, and I rewrote the book like 3 times, trying to figure out the right way to tell the story. And so my process will take, those are like my self edits. Like I go through and I make sure the story is the way I want. And then when I get it to like the most perfect place I can, and I don't really know what else to fix with it, then I send it to critique partners, and I have like 3 or 4 of them who will read it. They send it back to me. I fix it. I send it to my editor, fix it, send it to beta readers, fix it, send it back to my editor, fix it, ARC readers. So it's a long process for sure.
Gotcha. During that process, like, do you have any, I'd say, call it rituals? I mean, is there anything that you have to sit down and get done, for your writing routine?
So I always have to have a playlist turned on. During that brainstorming stage, I always will like track the songs that help me come up with the ideas or whatever. So then I can turn those on, and that will like drop me back into the zone pretty quick. One of the things that I really love to do, and this is like I tell this to everybody who's like, I get stuck, or what do I do to get past this or whatever. My biggest like advice for anybody is to, if you come up against a wall, or you have writer's block, or you just don't know where the scene is going, to just stop what you're writing and like go take a hot shower with no time limit, and like turn on your playlist and just hang out there. Because I thought it was just me, but there's actually research that's been done that shows that, I guess, when you're like in a hot shower, you're super relaxed, and that like promotes creativity. And I kid you not, every single time I do that, I come up with the answer for my plot holes, and I always come up with the next scene. Like it's magic. It works amazingly.
There's power in water for sure. So before I let you go, what is the main message or takeaway that you want readers to get from Well of Eida?
So I think it's when you read it, so my characters in here go through a lot of challenges, and they face a lot of darkness, and have to really struggle to overcome them. And I hope that when people read it, they can see that strength inside themselves, the strength that my characters have to find in order to survive, and in order to just reach their goals and overcome those challenges is not limited to them. Even though they're fighting monsters and they're fighting magic and darkness, that's not stuff we're fighting, but we are fighting our own challenges. We all have darkness in our past. We all will face darkness at some point, and we're all more than capable of finding that strength to overcome them. And so I hope people will read Well of Eida and feel like these characters are strong, and I can be just like that, and I am strong too, and find strength in it.
Oh, I love that. I think anytime that you can write a story that's got fantastical elements, but grounded in real human emotion, you're doing a good thing. Yeah. KB, where can our viewers, where can our listeners to the podcast find you?
So I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is KB_Benson_books. And I also have a newsletter that I send out every month that is probably like the most stable place, that and Instagram, to follow me. So
cool. Yeah. And your books are available on Amazon, ebook, audiobooks?
Yep, not audiobooks yet. They're coming for Well of Eida. But yeah, they're all available on Amazon. I've got paperbacks and ebooks of Call of the Sirens, and hardbacks, paperbacks, and ebooks for Well of Eida.
Fantastic. Now, before I let you go, there is one more question. It's always the last one, is this. And this may have already happened to you, because you're going to be somewhere, a book conference, a library, a book signing event, and somebody's going to come up to you, and they're going to have a well-worn copy of your book in their hands. And they're going to say, KB, you are my favorite author. And I have stories that I want to write. I want to be an author. Where do I start? So KB Benson, what is your number one piece of advice for that aspiring author?
I would say to start and to stop waiting. I think a lot of people think that they have to have it figured out before they start. And I will tell you, with The Harvest, I didn't. With Well of Eida, I did, because I knew more of what I was doing at that point. But you just have to start writing and put the creativity on the page, and then don't give up, because I think a lot of people think being an author is easy, and it's not. It is really hard. Everybody critiques you. Imposter syndrome gets to you all the time, and you're not alone in that. So don't give up. Yeah.
I think Marcus Aurelius said it best in his Meditations when he said, we could be good today, but we choose tomorrow. Right? We put off to tomorrow what we should be doing today. So I've always taken that to heart as well, that as a writer, as someone who has stories to tell, that it's very easy to say, I'm not quite ready yet, or it's not there yet. But tomorrow's not guaranteed. You got to start today.
Right. Or saying, when I have time. You'll never have time. Yeah. Nobody has time.
Oh, gosh. Yeah,
all of us with kids, there's no time.
we could have an entire podcast just on that, an entire series just on how I can't do it today, but tomorrow me, right, is Superman. Tomorrow me is going to have the time and the energy and tomorrow comes along and I'm the same tired, exhausted dad of a 3-year-old. And yeah.
Exactly. There's never time. You have to make it if you want it that much.
Absolutely. KB, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we will
Thanks for
talk to you
having
again
me.
soon. I look forward to book 2 coming out next year.
Thanks. We'll see ya.
Bye.
Bye.